Good morning, children. Welcome to the fourth edition of the How to Listen series. This is the Reference Mix edition. Let's go. What is a reference mix? It's a piece of music that you listen to when you're lost, basically, or before you get lost to make sure you don't get lost. It's something you need because your brain and ears are utterly unreliable. Even though you think they are reliable, they're not. They're not reliable at all. And I'm going to prove that to you in a minute. Why are they so unreliable? Because it's all about perception and because there are so many variables. Your speakers, your room, your headphones, the music itself, what you have for breakfast this morning. Everything influences the way you perceive the music. Why do we get lost? Why don't we have an absolute hearing? Very few people, have absolute hearing. I know a couple of people who are pretty close to absolute hearing, but even they make mistakes. We do not have absolute hearing because our brain is adaptive and our brain likes to believe the things it likes to believe. You see that in politics a lot, but it's the same in music. So for example, say you listen to music that is very bright for an hour. Your new reference is that music, which is no longer going to feel bright. It's going to feel like the new normal. And that new normal is bright. And so when you listen to a piece of music that's normal, it's going to feel dull, even though the other one's bright. Know what I'm saying? So the whole point of a reference mix is to establish some sort of a normal. It's not to establish a right for wrong. It's to make sure that you're not believing your own bullshit. Over the course of a project, there are many reasons why we could lose our bearings and no longer know which way is up or down. Different speakers, different room, different music, different breakfast. Everything could influence how you feel that day, how you perceive music that day, and the decisions you're going to make. So it behooves you to create some sort of a reference framework in your head that you know is what it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be very bright as long as you're very aware that it's very bright and how bright it is, or very compressed, or very dark, or very distorted. What matters is that you have to create some sort of consistency in your life. I'm going to give you some reference framework building tips, but before I do that, we're going to look at a few situations that you may have encountered. When you first listen to a track, either first time in a room or first time listening to that track in your room or on the radio, in the car, or in any situation, there are two basic ways you can apprehend the quality of a track. And when I mean quality, I don't mean good or bad. I mean the attributes, the texture of a track. Bright, dark, compressed, not compressed, loud, soft, that kind of stuff. There's the intuitive way. You use your intuition, meaning you play the track, you listen to it, and you're like, oh, this feels bright, hence it must be bright. Of course, as we've discussed before, if you've been listening to some really, really loud, very, very bright music, maybe your intuition is going to be off at that moment. But let's assume that you're fresh, it's in the morning, you haven't been blasted yet, and you press play on a track. This gauging of that music in your room is still called intuitive because it's in the air and you haven't referenced anything. So you can trust yourself because you feel that you have some sort of a baseline in your brain. Fair? Intuition. The problem with intuition, as I discussed before, is that 3 hours down the line, how reliable is that intuition, right? If you've been listening to brighter and brighter stuff, we can probably assume that you're going to feel everything bright feels good and everything normal feels dull, right? So you can get lost into your intuition because of the deficiency of your human brain. The other way you can apprehend music is by this more intellectual knowledge base that you can build over time. Now you're going to tell me, yeah, but if my brain doesn't have a permanent memory, if I don't have any absolute hearing, how can I build something based on one track? I'm going to forget that track too. Well, the brain is good at repetition. So if you focus on one track or a set of tracks, then you will get some sort of a self-reinforcing phenomenon that will allow you to zero in more and more on the quality, texture of that track. Also, if you're in a situation when you've been mixing for 5 hours and you may have a moment of doubt there, or maybe you're a little more methodical and your brain tells you, because your brain talks to you, weird, but it happens, right? So your brain tells you, dude, it's been 5 hours. Are you positive you want to add 12 dBs at 10K on this vocal, positive. Maybe that's the moment to use the intellectual side of the referencing and listen to that reference track. And that will give you perspective because now it's solid. The thing is, for it to be solid, that reference track has to be known to you and you have to have put it through its paces and you have to be able to trust it. Because if you use any other track, say the latest Cardi B single, you don't know if the latest Cardi B single sounds good. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it sounds good, but it's bright as balls. You don't know. So what you need is something that if you turn it on and your brain tells you, oh my goodness, this is dark, you have to be able to tell yourself, no, that's not dark. That is proper. I'm just super, super bright. See what I mean? So it's really important that you build yourself some sort of a library of songs that you absolutely know are perfect. So even if your brain tells you that they sound bad, you know that your brain is lying to you. Let me show you. I have here a session, our trusty Lifeboat session, and this is a mix that I did for some sort of a seminar at Sweetwater. It was all done in the box. I think the point of the thing was to mix the whole song in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, like super, super fast. I did it in a room I didn't know, didn't have time to reference, with speakers I didn't know, didn't have time to reference. And it was just an exercise in speed mixing and also showing people that you don't have to agonize over the bass drum sound for 8 hours to get a decent bass drum sound, right? I would assume that it doesn't sound so good, or maybe not. Let's see. Let's just listen to what I did under pressure at Sweetwater.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thoughts to better places. When I'm the burden she embraces. It's the same dark sea all around, familiar as the same old breaking down. So call out your lifeboats, honey, I'm all at sea. Could you be my lighthouse, honey, and rescue me? Can you help me find hope, honey? The water's deep. Oh, call out your lifeboats, honey, and rescue me.
All right, so I'm in my room. I know my speakers, I know my room. So within a half bar, and I haven't blasted myself today yet. So within a half bar of playing this, I already had my own intuition of how I felt. Did you? So, did it feel bright? Did it feel dark? Did it feel just right? Did you like the balances? Did you feel it was compressed and compressed? Did you feel it was natural? What did you feel? The thing is now, there's no absolute, right? Where there's no absolute versus relative. We're entering the realm of like, what's my reference? Where am I going? So before I play a reference, I'm going to play with it a little bit based on my feelings. I haven't heard a reference yet here for this exercise so that, I do this pretty naked in front of you. So to me, it felt dark, darker than what I expected it to be. So I was probably mixing either in a very bright room or with very bright speakers. Let's see, what would I do? I would probably take a look at what I did here and cheat. See, I can see that nothing was done on the high end, so I was happy with this high end back then. Which means what I was hearing back then, either I was drunk, which doesn't happen when I mix usually, or I was really not hearing what I'm used to. See, I'm removing some bottom here on the vocal, and here on the vocal I'm also adding a little bit of high end, but not that much. So I was really happy with this balance then, which means my monitoring was what it was. So let's try and fix that. Let's see.
She calms me down when I am faithless. brings my thought.
Like for example, right now I feel that maybe this is unnecessary. The low mids and the bottom added to the vocal. Maybe it's not dull, maybe it's a little muddy. Those are two different things, right? So let's see if that works for us.
She calms me down when I am faithless.
That's better already. And then let's try and see what we have on the Pultec. I'm going to add a little more high end on the Pultec.
She calms me down when I am faithless.
Let's check out that snare. See, I'm lowering some high end here on the snare. Let's remove that. That's just a duplicate of the snare that I'm gating like crazy so that I can send just the snare to some reverbs. It does that. I don't like the way it sounds today, so I know it's not the purpose of this video, but I just can't help it. You know, an obsession is an obsession. Here we go. That's more interesting.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thoughts to better places.
That's pretty good. Now, question yourself. Do you remember what it sounded like when I played it exactly 4.5 minutes ago? Nope. Nobody does, right? So how can you tell if this is good and that was bad? That's based on your intuition. Because you're here and your brain is seeing what you're doing and you tell yourself, this is good. Because this micro enhancement of removing the bottom of the vocal, adding a little bit of high end on the vocal, felt good at that moment. So your brain says, oh, this feels good. So this is your new normal, right? But are we still in a good place? Let's see.
She calms me down when I am faithless.
You know, I'm tempted to remove a little more of that low mids.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thought.
That may be a little too much. Now I know that it's too much because I just did it. My intuition tells me, don't do that.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thoughts to better places.
I feel that this really holds together very nicely. Let's see.
So call out your lifeboats, honey, I'm all at sea. Could you be my lighthouse, honey, and rescue me?
I'm okay with this. It's not necessarily the best mix in the history of modern music, but it's functional and I can hear the lyrics and I can hear every instrument and nothing feels offensive to me, right? So now I have another mix here, and I'm going to compare this fantabulous mix we just did with another mix. This is now.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thoughts to better places.
And this is another song.
Boats are unsteady, they rattle their sails. The oars scrape the seabed.
Let's listen to a place where there's drums in this other mix.
Came by will, others by force, shackled and shame done.
So now, what happens? This is obviously much brighter, right? And we can tell the vocal is much brighter, and we can tell that the snare is very different, so it's difficult to get a reference on the snare. But the vocal feels much brighter, right? So our previous mix feels much better.
I take advantage of her graces.
Now let's do something really fun. Let's listen to this wonderful song for an intro, a verse, a chorus, and a verse. Bear with me.
boats are unsteady, they rattle their sails. The oars scrape the seabed like cracked fingernails. Foreign flags fly like gulls in the sky. The Manhattan morning is coming to life. Together we stand on an island of foreign land, built by immigrant hands. Immigrant hands. Some came by will, others by force, shackled and shamed under immigrant laws.
Now let's listen to the other mix right away.
She calms me down when I am faithless. She brings my thoughts to better place.
Okay, so now that feels dark. So which is which? Is our current mix dark? Is the Immigrant Hand mix bright? Which is it? We don't know. Well, you don't know unless you've listened to the Will Knox record. I know because Immigrant Hands is one of my references. I know it very well. I know everything that's wrong with it, and I know everything that's good with it. So I used it not because it's badass, although I really like it. I use it because I know it's false, and I know where it stands, and I know it intimately because I've listened to it in 800,000 different places. So I know, for example, that our mix today, because of my reference work and because of this relationship I built with this track, I know that our mix today is dark. And the vocal mostly is dark and it could use some love and everything could be opened up a little bit. I also know that the S's on Immigrant Hands are a bit much, and that's a mistake I made at the time. But that allows me to check on speakers, for example, to make sure that, you know, the speakers are actually showing me the real transients and not just compressing everything and making everything sound good like some speakers. This is a typical example of you mix for a while, feels good. If you didn't have a reference or if you didn't have some sort of an other way to figure things out, you would probably deliver a dark mix to your client. Then you listen to your reference for a while and then it feels perfectly fine and the stuff you've been doing now feels dark. Well, what if your reference were corrupted? What if your reference were not a really good reference? What if you made a mistake building your reference? So it is really important that you spend time educating yourself on some sort of a baseline. And we're not talking about taste, because on Immigrant Hand, for example, my taste is these S's are too much, and if I were given the opportunity, I would remix it with more de-essing. But you have to just know where it's at. So a little later in this video, I'm going to listen to Immigrant Hands with you, and I'm going to show you everything that's wrong about it, so that you can learn that and maybe use it for yourself. Or you can do the same process with another track, but at least you'll see how I do it, and that may inspire you to do it for yourself. Let's look at a slightly different situation, in this case in the spirit of absolute versus taste. Meaning, is something right or wrong, or is something just a decision by the mixer? In this case, these are two records that came out, mixed by someone, and both those records have been scrutinized like records are scrutinized, and both of them were decided to be as good as they were going to be. Fair enough? So I'm going to play intro, verse, chorus of the first one, and then intro, verse, chorus of the second one, and then we talk.
Guys with guitars at open mic bars are so much better than guys with skateboards, so much better than guys with books. Guys with guitars sing over and over the same things that keep me awake at night. Guys with guitars, they listen to my songs. Sing a song for me, don't be horrible. I'll sing a song for you if you don't think it's terrible. Let's go home, we don't understand what tomorrow's about anyway. Write me a song and I'll sing along. You won't marry me, I won't marry you, but at least tonight we can pretend we'll do, and then we will write a song. People will sing along how he wouldn't marry her, she wouldn't marry him, and the next day she fell in love with another guy with a guitar at an open mic bar.
So that was Alev Lenz, the amazing Alev Lenz, and this is Amy Regan.
He likes to keep me clean and new, just out of sight but in his view. So if one day he comes around, it won't take much to pin me down. I comb my hair, I shine my shoes, as if the charm would make him do the things I always want him to, before he slips away to something new. But I'm no fool, once more and I'm through. So I dress myself to paint the town, wondering if he'll be around. And sure enough, I find him throwing all those lines that keep me going. My friends look on with skeptic's eyes. I write them off because I know they're right, but they can sleep tight. I'm moving on tonight.
We're in the absolute here, right? Both these records were scrutinized to the point where me as the producer and mixer and the artist's boyfriend and the artist's dog's boyfriend all decided that this was it. And they are so different. They are so different. Now let's listen to, one of them is very bright and one of them is a lot less bright. One of them has vocal very forward and one of them has the vocal deeper into the track. You know, if you listen to Alev singing here, she's deeper in the track.
Guys with guitars at open mic bar.
Here, Amy.
He likes to keep me clean and new, just out of sight but in his view.
Skateboards, so much.
It's like it does this, right? So are either of these things right or wrong? No, they're a question of taste. But how do you know if something is to be considered, you know, pretty loud or not loud enough? Because as you probably experienced, the vocal level is one of the hardest things to nail, right? So when I was working with Amy, I was following Amy's references and Amy's desire to be very forward. And then when I was working with Alev, she really wanted the vocal tucked in. And after a while, you no longer know what's going on. So in this case, my reference is going to be the elder statesman of folk music, David Crosby. Here's Things We Do for Love. This is a master, but check it out.
Was it something she said about a dream she had? One of those ones that faded so fast you knew it was bad. She dreamed that she's losing you. I guess it's time There's only so much time.
So in this case, our bass line happens to be kind of in between the two, right? So if we listen to Cross,
Was it something she said about a dream she had?
He likes to keep me clean and new, just out of sight, but in his
At open mic bars are so much better than guys.
Was it something she said about a dream she had?
so Cross sits right in between Aleph and Amy, which I'm sure you would enjoy. But what does it mean for us right now? It means that even though at this point my reference may be Cross, and that's my bass line, even if I'm mixing with Amy, again, with this bass line of Cross, I'm probably going to err towards this sound because that's where she wants to push it. But I know and I'm conscious that that's what it is, which means I'll be able to rein in a little bit how far I go. And then same with Aleph, I was like, I'll tuck it in and I'll tuck it in and I'll tuck it in. And then if I feel like, whoa, this is too much and it's not going to read well, I can reference Cross and say, oh, you know, it's not that far and I'm good. You don't have to be completely absolute with your reference. It's a matter of taste. And it's difficult to balance, especially when you have the artist's dog's boyfriend pushing on you to tuck the vocal in or push the dog up, usually. So it's really difficult if you don't do this all day, every day, what's your bass line and how far you can stray from it. So what I propose to do is I help you build your bass line and then show you a few techniques on how to use it, and then send you on your way to have some sort of a reference ground so you don't freak out when you get lost. How does one choose a song to turn into a reference mix? Well, my number one advice is to make sure that you really like the song, because you're going to listen to it 8 million times and you don't want it to get old too soon, because you have to want to listen to it. So it has to be great, or at least it has to be something you think is great. Number two, it would be a good idea to make sure that the track sounds good by default. And that's hard to do because you don't have a reference and you're building reference out of nothing. However, you can ask around, or you can use this track we're going to give you as your first bass line, and then you can grow from there. But the idea here is to choose a track that's fairly even and that has predictable flaws, so you can use the flaws to your advantage. Unless, of course, you decided that you wanted to be the brightest mixer in the world, which you could be. And in this case, your reference has to be very bright, right? Make sense? You have to choose the track that's going to push your mixes in the direction you want them to be. So for example, if you want to learn how to tuck vocals in, make sure that your reference track has vocals tucked in, and you'll get used to that. And that will be your bass line. And then if on one project you need vocals louder, they'll feel louder, but that's okay, because you'll know that your reference has the vocals tucked in. Make sense? Okay. So in this case of Will Knox, for example, it's one of my own mixes. I found that a lot of the people you see on this site and a lot of my friends and peers tend to reference their own stuff and not somebody else's stuff. The reason for that, I think, is that we know what we did, and also we know where we screwed up. And so we know what happens and we know why it is the way it is. So on top of building the reference of knowing what it is, we also know why it is what it is, which helps a lot, reinforcing the sense of security of knowing this is what it is, I'm not making a mistake, move forward. So, Will Knox, Immigrant Hands, off his first record, The Matador and the Acrobat, which was entirely produced and mixed and mastered here at Flux Studios in New York. And it was done 100% live, with him playing and guitar and singing at the same time, which greatly compromises both the sound of the guitar and the sound of the vocal, but that's okay. Also, we had Chris Henderson on bass, who's a really great player and a very even player. And the room sounds great here. It's one of my favorite rooms, not because it's mine, but because I love it. So the combination of all those things makes it a really cool track for me to play around. It's become so much a reference for me that I actually use it to check speakers in rooms I don't know. Let me show you why. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to point things out. So for example, the intro with the bowed bass is pretty perfect. There are no peaks, there's no note sticking out. There's no frequency sticking out. It is dry, and it is fat, and it is just right. The guitar is super even. There's nothing catching. If your playback system is good, you should hear a little bit of hiss at the top, just a little bit of hiss. It's not as clean and transparent as it should be because of the tape plugin I used at the time to soften things. That's so far. Now we're going to get into the vocal. The vocal is well recorded and sounds good, but you'll notice, you should notice, that there's a little bit too much action on the S. The transient is a little fast on the S. So if you listen to it and it feels dark, or if you listen to it and you feel that the S's are perfectly fine, then your speakers or your headphones are not rendering the vocal properly. And you should do something about that. Check it out.
The boats are unsteady. The boats are unsteady. They rattle their sails. The oars scrape the seabed like cracked fingernails.
But the rest of the vocal is perfect, and the tone of it really suits my personal taste for my reference track. Next, check this out.
Foreign flags fly.
Listen to the word flags.
Foreign flags fly like gulls in the sky.
On the word flags, there's a little bit of a peak at 3K-ish, like a little bit of a shine. It's a little too much. A lot of speakers don't play that back. So I know if I'm going to mix on those speakers, or if I'm comparing to another mix, and I don't hear that, or I hear that too loud, then I know I'm in trouble. On the vocals, I know that those S's are a little much on some words, and I know that that 3K thing there is a little bit much. And if I hear all that, I feel very safe. Let's keep going.
Foreign flags fly like gulls in the sky. The Manhattan morning is coming to life. Together we stand on an island of foreign land, built by immigrant hands.
Here is the bottom of this toms.
To life. Together we stand on an island of foreign land, built by.
It's perfect. It's basically a cliff. It has to go all the way down. You have to feel this fullness. And of course, I know what it should sound like. You, over time, if you use this as your reference track, will learn how deep it should be, because one day you're going to hear it in 3 different places and you'll be able to infer what it should sound like by the difference of those 3 different places. Or if you have a pair of Focal Spheres, this track sounds great on there. Or if you have a pair of Solo 6s, also Focal, it sounds great on there. Or Dynaudio BM6As, it sounds great on there. But basically, there's a natural sound to it with no peaks, no valleys, no dips. It just is. And that's why I picked this as my reference track. It's because I can compare anything to this. And this just is my baseline, my natural baseline, except for that shine at 3K on that one word because he leaned into the mic, and because of those S's, because there was just some phase relationship between the vocal mic and the guitar mic and the room, and this as good as I could get it at the time. So that's my reference track. That's what I use. These are the things that I know are wrong and good about it. We're gonna select the intro, verse, chorus, and a little bit of the second verse and make it a file and make it downloadable as an exercise file so that you can maybe use this as your first building reference track and then check it against other things, knowing that this, in my personal opinion, sounds good enough for jazz. And then you can go from there and sound something that sounds better or that sounds closer to what you need. But you have to start somewhere, and we thought that maybe it'd be nice for you guys to have something to start with, and this would be it. Next, we're going to look at some techniques on how to use this in the context of mixing. I reopened the session that we started with, Will Knox versus Will Knox. See who's going to win. Here's our original mix. I didn't keep the changes.
She calms me down when I am faithless.
In Pro Tools, there's a really easy way to A/B between two tracks. It's called input monitoring. The way it works is, it works like an old tape machine. On an old tape machine, you had an input button where you could listen to what was being fed to the tape machine. And then you could also listen to the tape monitor, what was already on the tape. So you could compare between what's on the tape and what was coming into the machine. Here is the same. This little green thing here, when it's not green, you're listening to what's on the track already. Immigrant Hands. And then when it's green, you're listening to what's coming into the track.
She calms me down when I am faithless.
The number one thing you must pay attention to is to level match your reference to your mix and not the other way around. Here's why. If your reference mix is a mastered track, which is fine, you know, let's just say that it's the genetic of survival of the fittest. If people keep referencing properly mastered tracks, then hopefully the mixes will keep getting better and better and better if the master is any good. Okay, so here's the deal. If you take a master track and you leave it at that level, what's going to happen? You're going to want to push your mix to match that level, which is dumb because you're guaranteed to ruin the bottom, overcompress everything. That's not how you do. What you should do is bring your reference mix down, especially if it's mastered, so that you match the level of your reference to the level of your mix. Check it out. Here,
She calms me down when I am faithless.
that's my mix. Here, that's my reference. It's so loud. Check out with the vocal.
The boats.
Ow. So use clip gain down here to bring it down. I'm estimating like 10 dBs, maybe a little more. Let's just be square because we're OCD. Everybody's OCD to some extent. 12.
The boats are unsteady. Deep dark sea, there's sails.
Now I've lowered my mastered Immigrant Hands 12 dBs using clip gain in Pro Tools to be more or less at the same level, and I can go back and forth between my mix and my master by just clicking here. That is incredibly useful. Also, you have playlists, so you can have as many references as you want. I suggest not going crazy with many references because that screws with your brain. So pick one, two, if you need two different things. You know, maybe one has a great vocal sound that you want to reference and one has a great bottom you want to reference. But if you could find one track that does both, it's better for your blood pressure. So the playlist in Pro Tools let you choose what you're listening to, different references if you have to, and maybe different versions of the same mix, and do input monitoring this way. It works amazing. Now, not every DAW manages input monitoring this well. Some of them are doing a pretty good job. Some of them are doing an ever so slightly lesser job. And sometimes it makes absolutely no sense to use input monitoring on some DAWs because they have these weird rules where you can hear actually what's coming in and what's on the track at the same time, which is totally surreal to me. But a way to go around that in any DAW, or it actually also works in Pro Tools, is to just create a new track and drag your reference onto that track. Now we're gonna call this ref, okay? And to send that track to a separate pair of outputs, say input 3, 4, okay? Now if I press play,
So call out your lifeboats, honey.
here on this track, I'm gonna call it Lifeboats Mix. And now I'm gonna have my Lifeboat Mix. And then on this track, I have my reference mix. And then for this to work, you need a monitor section. And then you can assign output 3, 4, which is the output that you sent your reference to another input on your monitor section. And now you can A/B between the two tracks by just switching two inputs. Make sense? And the other thing that's amazing about that is you don't have to use any kind of clip gain stuff. You can just use the fader to adjust the overall level of how much level is going from this track to your monitor section. So if your input monitoring doesn't work so well, then you could use 2 tracks with 2 sets of stereo outputs and a monitor section to switch in between the two. It's kind of nice to be able to do it physically like this without having to look at the screen and make sure you click that little I button. Because sometimes you click the little I button and you have your eyes closed and you think you're clicking the I button. And then if you're listening between 2 versions of the same mixes as opposed to a reference and a mix, sometimes you kid yourself into thinking that you're listening to the new mix when you're listening to the old one, and then you make mistakes. And then your family is doomed for 7 generations. If you don't have the monitor control, you can use the other track and set it to the same output and make sure that it's muted. And then when you want to use it, you solo it. So I'm listening to my mix.
So call out your
And then here's my ref.
foreign flags fly.
And then here's my mix.
So call out your
Not super elegant, not one click. Can't really do it with your eyes closed, but close enough for jazz. Here's another way to reference, which is actually very useful, but it involves the devil. Let me launch Spotify. Some of your music is going to be on Spotify, right? And some of the music is actually going to be leveled by Spotify because, and this is the subject of another video, but Spotify levels your music for you. It's a feature. I created an ear/speaker test playlist, which is a bunch of tracks that I listen to all the time. Infatuation, one of my mixes for Colette. Immigrant Hands for Will Knox, you know that one. And then a bunch of stuff that other people have done, whom I have much respect for. Selassou, This World, amazing bottom, super rich bottom. Grace Jones, probably one of my favorite sounding records of all time. This track, This Is, not very punchy, but unbelievably intricate and beautiful. Limit to Your Love is a great way to check that your sub is not going to explode when you play some bottom, because if it's going to explode, it's going to explode when you play this track. And then St. Vincent, Smoking Section, that's a new one that Tom Almus makes, and I really like how loud and dry the vocal is, and I really like how the bass drum on the second verse comes in and is a very tall mix. And for me, it's interesting to check my stuff against that from time to time when I want to make sure that my mix is very tall, has a lot of range this way. For referencing, what I do, if I'm not referencing my own tracks from time to time, apparently last time I referenced my own tracks, but say I would put Immigrant Hands into one Spotify playlist called Ref, and I would press play, and then I would just have it loop down here. And now I have Spotify playing Immigrant Hands on loop at all times, no matter what I do. And all I have to do to listen to it is hit the button that I have the output of my Mac on. Of course, for that, you also need a monitor section. But really, let's be real, you need a monitor section. So basically, I'm using Spotify as my ref track, the trick I showed you with 2 tracks. The thing that's good about that is that Spotify has leveled the music to where it's going to get played. Eventually, your mix will get played on Spotify until Spotify goes out of business. But until then, your mix will get played on Spotify. And so it's really instructional and interesting to compare where your mix is at with a Spotify mix. The reason for that is Spotify is not crushing things. Spotify is actually leveling things in a semi-reasonable manner. So you can compare your mixes with masters at the same level without having to destroy your mix. That's because Spotify will take the loudest master in the history of the universe and bring it down so that everybody plays more or less at the same level. Which means, in the case of Spotify, you can actually check your mix against masters on Spotify without having to lower the Spotify master most of the time. Sometimes because of album rules and because of the morphology, the look of certain tracks, they play a little louder on Spotify. You don't want to get fooled by that. But when you find your references, and if it's Immigrant Hands, it's Immigrant Hands, it plays just fine on Spotify, then you can just let Spotify be on stun and check against it. And you know you'll be in the ballpark, and you know that when you deliver your mix, it won't play any louder or softer on Spotify. It'll play exactly the same. Isn't that wonderful? For those of you who don't have a reliable input monitoring button on your DAW, don't have a monitor section, and are physically allergic to Spotify, there's a solution in the shape of plugins. I bought a few. I bought Sample Magic, Magic AB, quite good. There's a reference by Mastering the Mix. And my favorite is by the good people at Melda. They're really awesome people, so I always favor good people. It's called Compare. It's part of the bundle. I'm sure you can buy it solo. He's got so many plugins. It's really difficult to learn them all, but Compare is dope. This is what Compare does. First thing you do is select your ref, Immigrant Hands to keep the theme. And it's going to think about it for a second. That's it. You have Immigrant Hands here. It's a very simple principle. If the plugin is bypassed, you hear your mix. If the plugin is enabled, you hear your ref. Okay? Now, it gets deeper. First, you can sync them, because at this point right now, if I go deeper in the song, it will always play wherever it left off. As opposed to synchronize, and now, if I go to the top, it plays the top. If I go deeper into the track, it plays deeper into the track, which is pretty nice. The other thing it does is very well is you can actually use the automatic level setting, meaning you can play your source. It will listen to what's coming in, listen to your reference, and try and match levels the best way it can. Or you can set up ALC. It will continuously try and match those levels as your record goes. I personally have a problem with ALC because it kills dynamic. So I'd rather find a spot in the song that's representative.
It's my thought.
Voila, and you don't even need the plugin anymore. Now, if you want to switch between your mix and your ref, all you have to do is bypass and unbypass this. It's pretty nice. The difficult part about this is to build trust between you and that track or those tracks. And that takes time. You can't really accelerate it. What you can do is watch videos like this and be aware of it at all times. That will accelerate it a little bit. As long as you're aware of a problem and aware of the solutions, that puts you on the right path. But you have to pay the dues, and you have to take that track and you have to listen to it so many times in so many different places with a critical ear and a critical mind, doubting yourself at all times until you no longer have to doubt. Does that make sense? Now, are you going to use the Will Knox track as a reference if you do deep house? Why not? I mean, if you want to be style appropriate, maybe you want to take a Derek Carter track and pick one that you think sounds great everywhere, and that becomes your new reference. And that will push you to mix in that realm, in that direction. It'll help you choose your amount of reverb. It'll help you choose your amount of compression. You have to make sure that that's what you want to do, though. That's your thing, and that's going to stay with you for years. If you switch to a more neutral track that just shows you not style, but evenness and tone and maybe a certain neutral balance, then that could be used for many different environments. And you could be listening to Will Knox for your reference for the whole day, and then when you listen to your mix at the end, you crush the hell out of the vocal and it's swimming in reverb. But at least you know that that's what it is, and you know it was done on purpose, not because you lost your way along the way. Because it's easy to lose your way along the way, because that's what ways do. Et voilà.